Before we get into today's lesson, I just need to note that today is Transfiguration Sunday, and usually I would read a passage from one of the Gospels about that story where Jesus lit up brighter than the sun. Brilliant white light. The disciples hardly knew what to do. And the point that I make each and every year, hopefully in a new and a fresh way, is that what the disciples see in Jesus on the mountaintop when he lights up that way is who Jesus always was and has been. It's like the curtain is peeled back for just a moment and they see what is always true of Jesus in his power, glory, beauty, radiant love, and they are overwhelmed by it. Then they leave the mountain, the dust settles, and they return to the mundane. But if they could remember what is true just under the surface, well, then they will experience reality on a deeper level, a truer level. They will, in fact, experience God. That's the point of the Transfiguration, and that's why we remember it each and every year. And it's important to note it. This year, though, I thought it best to preach from an old story in the Old Testament in the book of Genesis, chapter 29, verses 10 through 22. Because in this time of pandemic, in this time of separation, where the transcendent in the sanctuary, the transcendence of our worship experience seems like a memory fixed in the past. It's going on almost a year now since we have been in our own sanctuary at Northwood. And so I thought that maybe it would be a good thing for us to consider this idea of the transfiguration as it applies to our own geographic spaces, the own places where we sit, stand, where we abide on any other given time when we are not in our sanctuary and at church. And consider, maybe there are other holy places besides our sanctuaries, those places that we set aside as special. And they are special, and we look forward to being back in them. All of that being said, I'd like to introduce today's scripture reading, which I already told you is from Genesis chapter 29, verses 10 through 22, and it reads, "Now Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. So he came to a certain place and stayed there all night, because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it at his head, and he lay down in that place to sleep. Then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached to heaven. And there the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give you to you and your descendants. Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and the east, to the north and the south, and in you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you." Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Then Jacob rose early in the morning and took a stone that he had put at his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. But the name of the city had been Luz previously. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and keep me in this way, that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace? Then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set as a pillar shall be God's house, and all that you give me I will surely give a tenth to you. So there you have it, that old story in all of its oldness, and it's perhaps best for us to enter into the story as the character. This is not always wise. We should not always try to see ourselves as the primary object, or the primary subject, I should say, of what the scripture text is about. We should not be so arrogant as that. But sometimes it's good to put yourself in it and imagine what it might be like to be on the run in the wilderness and to be visited by a vision, a dream, whatever it is we are meant to think. Like Jacob did in this story. This is the last thing that he expected. He was a man on the run. Of course, he was on the run. His brother was out for blood. You may recall how he had tricked his brother Esau out of his birthright, meaning the family farm, his inheritance, and all that he was meant to receive upon their father's death, because Esau was the eldest son, as was the custom in those days. Everything went to the eldest. Whether you think that's fair or not is another question, but that is what happened. And so Jacob tricked his brother out of his birthright, and then later the blessing that his father apparently could only give to one son and was meant to give to the eldest. And so Esau is so infuriated, he plans to kill Jacob. He swears he will kill Jacob, and so Jacob decides to flee to his relatives. And that's what's happening here. And so he beds down for the night, an ordinary night. The sun sets. Who knows what he had for dinner, and then he falls asleep. This is surely not the place where you would expect to receive a divine visit. Not the kind of place that you would expect to find any kind of intimacy with God. All Jacob had was a stone on which to rest his head. A very humble pillow. Well, it turns out, maybe not pillow, but a very humble place to lie. So first, a bit about this stone. I should say that we are probably not meant to think that he was using a stone like a pillow, as you would lay down your head on a pillow at night, something soft to rest your head on. Rather, we are probably meant to think that this stone is placed behind his head to protect him in case some marauder or thief or someone who wished him harm may come by and whack him on the head while he's asleep and steal his stuff, or perhaps worse. Later, this stone will be used as a pillar, as a monument of the place where Jacob now is, and so we would be better not to think of it as some small stone, something like this size. Probably this is some large stone that he has behind his head to protect him. In the wilderness, while on the run, I emphasize not the sort of place where you expect to encounter the divine. Yet it was in this place where he has an intense encounter with the divine. And in fact, has a profound spiritual transformation. He has a remarkable dream. He sees a ladder, or actually, probably, we are meant to think of it as a stairway to heaven, like so many other staircases Jacob would be aware of as ziggurats, religious shrines set up by Babylon, then Persia, or even Assyria before that. They had set these up to bridge the gap between the heavens and the earth. And so you would have a tall structure with a staircase that went up to the top, and special personages, not plain ordinary folk like Jacob, no, certainly no scallywag on the run, but important persons, priests, or the king, who was also seen as divine. Those are the sorts of persons that would go up the steps to the heavens, and the people would watch from the ground. And then the king would come down and give the instructions and rules, laws that just so happened to keep the powerful on the top. Those are the sorts of stairways to heaven that Jacob is used to seeing, that people in that area would have been used to seeing, and that oppressed persons in exile, like the Israelites who first heard this story, would have been used to seeing. But this one visits Jacob in a humble place, a person of, at this point, very little account. Just a promise made by God, actually a promise made to his ancestors, is all he has. Not much to go on from the vantage point of not a few. And a ladder finds him in a dream, and angelic beings are ascending and descending this ladder, and he is amazed. The distance, the gap between the heavens and the earth folds in front of him. He does not need to go to the special ziggurat or wait for the special person to go up. God comes down to him and speaks to him and says, amongst other things, and I quote, "Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go." Could you imagine God saying such a thing to you? Jacob discovers that he is not alone on the run. In fact, he never was. He never was. So he wakes up from the dream and he turns to the plain, ordinary stone by which he has laid his head. You know, that object that moments before is just an old rock. He probably didn't even pick out a special one, just fell down in front of the first one he could find to catch some sleep. And now he would declare it a holy place. And he would set the stone up as a pillar, and he would mark it with oil. The oil that he pours over it would stain it a darker color so that others would walk by what was before ordinary and perhaps wonder if it is extraordinary. And perhaps take a moment to experience the presence of God in the wilderness, in the temple, the tabernacle, that is nature, that is humble, that is unassuming. And he says, if God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace. Apparently that's all he wanted to do, was to go back home, back to my father's house in peace. Then the Lord shall be my God. It's like an exchange of vows, promising faithfulness to the one who is faithful, as we all should. Jacob has become aware of how this ordinary geographic location has become extraordinary. It has been transformed. It has been, dare I say, transfigured. What was always true about God's presence near him, around him, has been revealed. A transfiguration of a place instead of a person. Although, of a person too, because it was the person of God who showed up. A portal to the heavens. The heavens breaking through, the seeming mundane in Jacob's perspective is changed. And so he names this plain and ordinary space Bethel, which means the house of God. Bethel. And that place, that geographic location, would continue to serve as an important place and sometimes religious site in the centuries to follow, and would be mentioned again and again in several other biblical passages. But where am I going with this? What does this have to do with us today? Well, I think it has a lot to say to us in the midst of a pandemic. I'd wager that a few of us, maybe most of us, maybe every one of us, has at one time over the course of this past year wondered where the holy places have gone to. Where does worship that feels like worship happen? Where does it occur? Where is that space where it seems for a moment, if you squint and in the right light, the gap between the heavens and the earth come together, and we experience a closer presence with God. It's hard to find in a pandemic, and conscientious churchgoers have been shut out of their church buildings for, as I said, going on a year, those places that we've long thought of as holy. And now they may not be as obvious as Jacob's ladder, but we hope that they too close the gaps between heaven and earth. And now we sit in our living rooms, on our beds, watching something that pretends to be a church service through some new app that we never heard of before this, called Zoom. Sunday morning, sometimes still finishing our breakfast. You never bring food into the sanctuary before, and now you're eating your breakfast as you find enough time to sit in front of your screen for an hour to do something that we are trying to see as church. Sometimes in our sweatshirts, maybe even our pajamas. You don't go to the store that way, and here you are in church in your pajamas. Is this place holy? Right now, this interchange where you are watching me through your screen? Surely not. Bethel, house of God? Not hardly. And for those of you watching who maybe aren't church goers, you can think about your own sacred places that you have been absent from during this time. Those places where you seek connectedness, closeness, intimacy, love between you and others, where that love is reflected by them into your life and you are blessed by it. That truly indescribable feeling of communion with another. I call it God. Perhaps you think of it differently. Where is that during the pandemic? Where is love? Where is the answer to our loneliness? And for we churchy types, this pandemic has amplified these questions that are sometimes with us without the pandemic in the sanctuary. Where is God? Where can we find God? Where does God find us? And behind these questions lies the quest for right and proper worship, not for its own sake, but for the connection that we hope that it evokes, that it sparks between us and this mysterious presence we call God, this mysterious person that hides, seems to. Does God hide? And so we create a place we call the sanctuary or temple. And we sit in that place and we appreciate the aesthetic and the art, these conduits to the divine. And they are. I'm not trying to undermine any of that. But without that, where is God? Jacob's story teaches us that maybe, for now, all you need is a rock. Maybe a rock is all you need. Or maybe not even that. When Jacob woke up, he exclaimed, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." How if he had never had the dream? The Lord would have still been in that place, and he never would have known it. My prayer right now is for us in this moment to know it, the presence of God, where you sit, where we are, in our homes, in our cars, wherever this pandemic, these interesting times have placed us. And this is not the last time that a revelation will be discovered in the biblical text. I immediately thought of Moses in the desert, discovering that he was standing on holy ground whilst he approached the burning bush. It's my hope that you will discover this now, that God is with you even in the space that you now occupy. And that space, right now, where you sit, perhaps in your boredom, is holy. Perhaps you're listening to this on a walk or maybe in your house. I'm sure it's some plain and ordinary place, as plain and common as the wilderness where Jacob fell asleep that night. How if that place were holy? Today's story is about finding the eyes to see this truth. Or as I said last week, the fault is often in our eyes. The smallness of our eyes that cannot see what is right there. I'm hoping for a transfiguration of our physical spaces, as well as an awareness of the transfiguration of the divine that is in each and every one of us, as the disciples so long ago saw Jesus transfigured, revealing who he was the whole while. This is a poignant message in a time of pandemic, when we have been so long removed from our sanctuaries, community disrupted, displaced by isolation. Now, things are different today. This situation isn't exactly like the situation of the people who first read this story or first put it to page. I should have mentioned probably earlier that this story was first read by persons in exile, who had been removed from their homes and scattered all throughout the land by the most dominant empires of their own day, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians. Their country had been conquered by military force and their rule overrun. And yet this message finds them in the midst of it. God is with you even now, even when you do not know it. Now, as I was saying, things are different today, but we are in our own way displaced. Feelings of isolation and abandonment may still be felt by God's people in every age, and it's certainly true during this pandemic. Jacob's discovery is still ours to make. God is with us. This house, this time, this meeting, this communion, imperfect though it is a holy space, even a holy digital space, which, if God is faithful, and God is faithful, will be enough for now. Let us rejoice in that we have enough for now. God is with us even during Zoom calls and slow connections, inconsistent internet connections, choppy video. Love finds a way into our lives in spite of it all. The stairway to heaven is ever before us. The house of God is here. While our sacred spaces or the sanctuaries help us experience God, God is not contained in them. We must never create them into idols. You know it's an idol the second you discover that you cannot experience God without them, mistaking the object for the thing we are seeking, the one who we are seeking, the person we are seeking. Maybe this time of pandemic is an opportunity for us to disconnect from objects of worship or conduits of worship or rituals that were becoming or had become our idols, stripped down to bare basics. As I keep going on about, it turned out that all Jacob needed was a rock, if that, just a humble rock. Where are the sacred spaces? Does our exile from God's house at Northwood, its manifestation at Northwood, signify an expulsion from God's presence? Even when it felt that way, it was not so. God is always with us, even when we cannot see it. God is with us now, even though we did not know it before. Our prayer today is for the eyes to see it and to say, along with the disciples at the mountain at Jesus' transfiguration, and along with Jacob by that rock where heaven came down, surely God is in this place, but we did not know it. Now we know.